General McCaffrey, I want to start with you and unpack a little bit the concept of a stalemate. What does that mean to you in the context of Putin's invasion of Ukraine?
Well, there's been a lot of discussion of that, including by some of the military experts about the culmination of the Russian campaign, in which they may have concluded that their ground combat units cannot achieve the takedown of Kyiv and the other major metropolitan areas. I'm dubious of that thought. I think the Russians may well decide that instead they're going to try and encircle these cities and lay siege to them and use their artillery forces and rockets to bring the city down in a massive atrocity targeting the civilian population. On the other side of the equation, the Ukrainian armed forces, their principal target right now is the mindset of the Russian generals, to convince them that they simply can't pull this off and have that be self-evident, not just to their own soldiers, but to Putin. It's a very bitter situation. It would be nice if we could find a game changer. The U.S. anti-armor munitions Switchblade 600 is one possibility, and the second is to try and supply anti-ship missiles down in the south to help protect the port of Odessa. But it's a very difficult situation for the Ukrainians.
Caddy, this has not gone the way Putin expected it to go. This was supposed to be a swift decapitation of the Ukrainian government, the installation of a puppet regime, and we are now in day 26. Chris Coons, the senator, had a sort of remarkable analysis of what was happening. I want to play that sound and get your reaction to it.
I mean, Putin has changed strategies. He no longer believes that he can take Kyiv through a conventional military invasion. And so now he has decided to pursue a different path. He is going to move towards a genocidal strategy in which he attacks and kills as many Ukrainian civilians as possible so as to bring Zelensky to the negotiating table simply to stop that slaughter of innocents. That is unconscionable. It will ultimately cause the United States to get more deeply involved in this war to stop that brutality. And in my mind, and now I believe in the president's mind, there's no question that this constitutes war crimes.
That is, of course, Senator Chris Murphy, not Chris Coons. My apology to both senators. But, Caddy, your thoughts on this notion that the new strategy is effectively genocide, that kill as many civilians as possible, bomb as many art schools and theaters and hospitals and maternity wards, drive as much of the population out of the country and underground to force Zelensky's hand. Does that appear to be what's going on? And how can Zelensky withstand a strategy like that?
If you take Mariupol as the example, that does appear to be the strategy. If you take Aleppo as the example, if you take Grozny and Chechnya as the example, then there's a history, there's a precedent in the Russian military playbook for this. And also, I think you're right to point out forcing people out of the country, because you've got, what, 3.5 million refugees have now fled Ukraine into NATO countries. That puts a lot of pressure. Poland's taken in the vast majority of them. I don't know that that's a deliberate strategy, but certainly the more refugees you have going into the rest of Europe, the more pressure that puts on the Western alliance, which up until now has held together very well. So there's that is a result of what he's doing. I think one interesting question is to try to figure out what Putin knows. I mean, we get reports from the Ukrainians. We don't know exactly what Putin is understanding and is being told by those closest to him. Clearly, he was misinformed about how easy it would be to take Ukraine. He thought he could do it. He could do regime change in 72 hours. That hasn't panned out. Is he now getting accurate information from the battlefield? Is he being told how much his forces are struggling, how many people he's lost? We don't know that, and I think that's an important part of this equation, because that would then dictate the calculations that he makes going forward.
General, what's your assessment of that? Is Putin getting good wartime intelligence? I mean, we now know that higher rank officers seem to be on the front line. Some of them are getting killed in all of this. Do you think he's getting those reports as he makes his decisions about where he wants his troops moved?
Well, I listened to a former senior political leader in Russia say that it's more likely that they would try and kill Putin than tell him the truth. And I think there's probably a degree of accuracy to that. Putin has a mindset which, in my view, will never allow him to back off seizing all of Ukraine and reintegrating it into Russia. He's not going to negotiate that away. They have largely succeeded, I might add, in the southern part, getting the land bridge, so-called, between Crimea and the Donbass. When he gets Odessa, if he can, that would be his primary objective. But his public rhetoric, the actions of the Russian armed forces indicate to me that that's not the end of it. He wants the whole country. From a strategic sense, he's wrecking the asset he desires. He'll end up with a ruined Ukraine with a population in rebellion, with millions spread throughout Europe as refugees, and indeed the globe. So it's a no-win situation for Putin. The target, again, has to be the mindset of the Russian generals and, to some extent, Putin and the Russian people, publishing the names. My guess is there's 20, 25,000 Russian wounded. We need to make sure the International Red Cross publishes their names and hometowns so that the Russian people start getting an inclination, not just of economic and political sanctions and a pariah nation, but the impact on their own population, their mothers.
Yeah, well, I guess that's an open question, though, right? We hear reports that the phones have been seized from, the rank and file soldiers, that they're not able to communicate. There are unverified reports of mobile crematoriums that the Russians have brought. I mean, there's a huge question about the information flow from the battlefield back to the home front, Kady.
Yeah, and we know how important those soldiers' mothers were in Chechnya, even at the end of the war in Afghanistan. It was pressure from, the Committee of Soldiers' Mothers that helped change policy in Moscow. So it is important that they get the information. It's important that the rest of the Russian public gets the information as well. And that information war space, trying to get accurate information back to the Russian people, I think the chances, the Russian Putin watchers that I have spoken to in the last day or two don't think that Putin himself is under threat from his own population yet. The sanctions will take a while to really kick in and for people to really feel them. And they think that he is pretty secure, and actually that there is more support than we might expect from older Russians in particular for what he's doing in Ukraine. I think the general touched on something important when he mentioned, there have been Russian successes in the south of Ukraine. When it comes to Russian military successes in the south of Ukraine and the degree of Russian support for what President Putin is doing in Ukraine, we shouldn't, have a wishful thinking mindset where we think we want it to be so and therefore it is so, because it's not necessarily so. And I think we have to be clear-eyed about that.